Exploit blockchain. October, Kiev, HackIT.
Hello, thank you everybody for coming here. Based on our attention rate, I think people are a little tired from long speeches, so I promise to keep it short and sweet. My name is Julian Zegelman. I'm a general partner at TMT Blockchain Fund. It's a $100 million venture capital fund that invests in blockchain startups. Our previous fund, TMT Investments, is a publicly traded fund that did its IPO on the London Stock Exchange in 2011 and now manages about $115 million. So the purpose of today's little presentation is to talk about cybersecurity and especially about opportunities for creating companies and investing in startups in cybersecurity and blockchain. But first of all, I want a little show of hands, and don't be shy. Raise your hand if you've ever been hacked. Anyone? All right, so who lost personal data? Who lost Bitcoins? Who lost those really embarrassing photos? Anyone? Okay, well, we'll get there. So I'll tell you a little story. It's very ironic, but about a year ago, I was speaking to a cybersecurity crowd at a conference in Moscow, and I didn't have a chance to leave the room when I realized that my phone got hacked. And so what we learned from that experience is that the fund security, the email security, all of our hard wallets and cold wallets, everything was very secure. Nobody could break in, but Facebook wasn't so secure. And every single one of my 5,000 friends on Facebook got a message from me asking them to send the Bitcoin. Turned out I either have really bad friends or really smart friends because nobody sent anything. So when people talk about cybersecurity, I think it's a very broad subject, and it helps to look at it from two perspectives. First, what should be done for the blockchain industry and the blockchain applications in terms of security to make them more scalable and to raise adoption? Because a lot of commentators, a lot of investors in the space agree that blockchain has two big roadblocks to mass adoption. One is scalability, right? A lot of the current protocols, especially public chains, are just not made for commercial deployment. They can't withstand commercial grade deployment. Another big one that people are a little shy to talk about is security, right? Whether you're a consumer or you're a large enterprise, nobody wants to use software with holes in it. And unfortunately, looking at crypto exchanges or dApps or wallets, the last few years show that this is still an emerging technology with a lot of vulnerabilities, and some of them we don't even know about. And when they come up, we come up with solutions. So that's one thing, what type of security features and what type of security companies and products should there be in the blockchain space to make it more adaptable? And then the flip side of that is, how can you use blockchain technology to solve current cybersecurity problems? So I'm just going to chat about it. And why am I even talking about it, right? As a venture capitalist, my job is not to make data more secure. My job is very simple. It's to make money for our investors. And in our business, you make money by investing in good companies, helping them grow, become industry leaders, and then either become acquired or, in more rare cases, but we've had a few of them in our portfolio, go public and raise money in the capital markets, do an IPO. And cybersecurity remains one of the largest problems of our generation, because as the amount of data grows, as data becomes more and more key to what we do, and as data governs whether or not we have access to certain services, whether or not we make money, whether or not we lose money, protecting that data and protecting exploitation of that data becomes key. And people, whether it's consumers or enterprises, are willing to pay money for their basic need to be safe from cyber attacks, to be safe from hacking, to have privacy, to protect their data. So just a few. So when we talk about cybersecurity problems, this is really a very wide topic. I mean, what do we have there? We have certain products right now that manage systemic risk management. So systemic risk management is a really fancy word for one very simple concept. You can build a very brilliant system, but as long as you have humans and not cyborgs or AI managing that system, human error can screw up the most complex level of cybersecurity defense. So here's a very simple example. One of our portfolio technology companies years ago sent an employee to San Francisco. The employee had a wonderful day towards the city and then made the mistake of leaving a laptop in a car. So if you ever lived in San Francisco, you realize you never do that. You probably don't want to do it in any big city. The laptop, the car got hacked. Broken, really, but hacked just sounds so much more technical. The laptop got stolen and hacked, and there was a data breach, right, which precipitated a very long and expensive process to comply with all the different regulations. It cost the company millions of dollars. They spent another few $1 million revamping their security protocols, etc. The company had wonderful protocols in place, except for one very simple thing: human error. So at one level of cybersecurity and opportunities for building companies in this space is dealing with DevOps and dealing with systemic risk management. So more and more we see companies popping up that are not looking at treating the problem, they're looking at prevention. And there are companies that do training for both consumers and enterprises on data management and cybersecurity. There are companies that do audits, companies that examine the current systems in place, etc. If you talk about blockchain industry, systemic risk management is actually a very big problem for the industry. If you think about hacks or the big cases of ICOs getting millions of dollars stolen or wallets being broken, sometimes it's the technology. Very often it's not the technology. Very often it's a human factor, right? It's somebody clicking on the wrong link or going to the wrong web page or not following simple protocols. And I think that's very big growth in the industries. For example, third-party custodians that keep your crypto, keep your digital assets, that have insurance policies and protocols in place. It's training non-technical personnel on how to live in this new digital assets world and how to keep assets, how to deal with the advantages and the limitations of blockchain. That it's immutable, it's irreversible if we talk about the majority of the public chains, and a simple mistake like switching a letter or a number in a wallet address could cost you millions of dollars and could be irreversible. Another very big area in cybersecurity where blockchain could actually be quite useful is identity fraud and identity verification. This is a problem that actually affects both developed countries and the developing world. In the developed countries where your identity, your credit score, your digital identity is typically the key to a lot of your financial functioning, right? It's key to getting a mortgage, it's key to getting a student loan, to opening a credit card. Identity theft is actually extremely widespread, and it's costing governments, consumers, and enterprises tens of billions of dollars a year. You would think that it's not a problem in the developing world, but it actually is. The problem in the developing world with identity or lack of identity is twofold. There's actually 1.1 billion people in the world today that the United Nations estimate they do not have a verifiable, reliable government identity. Without a government identity like a driver license or a passport or any sort of government-approved ID, those people sadly almost do not count. They cannot apply for government aid, they cannot leave the country, oftentimes they cannot open a bank account or be employed, and that's a huge problem. In fact, the United Nations recently rolled out a program called ID 2020, and the goal is by 2020 to have at least a prototype solution for creating digital ID, an ID that's not the old-fashioned paper passport or a plastic driver's license, but an ID that's digitized, driven by blockchain, unique, and could be given to people who currently are not identified. How can blockchain be used for digital identity? Well, there is a number of different applications. Some applications tackle it from an identity token. For example, creating a unique key signature, digital key signature that's assigned to a person and acts in a sense as digital identity. Others create blockchain-based solutions for keeping track of various bad actors and looking at correlations between how many times a specific IP address or a specific wallet or a specific email or group of emails who are implicated in bad behavior, right, and identity theft, etc., and then using this blockchain-based database to check against those bad actors when, for example, a credit card gets a new application. So digital identity and identity verification is actually an enormous area where blockchain is being used today at prototype stage, but yet I believe will be used commercially in the next 3 to 5 years. Data protection is another big area. Whenever you have a centralized database, the problem is there's typically a single point of entry and a single point of vulnerability that could be exploited to get access to the entire database. While the current public and private chains are not perfect, and a lot of them are far from being functioning for commercial applications, theoretically they present a very important advantage over centralized databases. The database in a blockchain and a true distributed ledger is distributed among many nodes, and as a result you don't have a single point of vulnerability. And the data is not stored in one single place, so even if theoretically you can hack a few nodes and get in, the overall cost of kidnapping the entire system, doing what's called a 51% attack in a proof-of-work system, or doing a similar type of attack in a proof-of-stake system, is typically extremely high. When you talk about a largely distributed popular chain, like for example Bitcoin, right? So the fact why there hasn't been a 51% on Bitcoin is simple economic forces. It's so expensive to do that you need such a large actor or actress to come together to do it, that there are better ways to make money using the amount of capital it would take to try and run an attack on the Bitcoin protocol. So data protection, building decentralized databases, implementing them into the current infrastructure at enterprises is another interesting application of blockchain in cybersecurity. As Aaron Kleiner, one of the executives at the Microsoft blockchain department, mentioned, every internet user is a potential blockchain user. And that's the way I like to think about it as well, that we really stand at the very beginning of the third wave of innovation in the internet, which will be driven by blockchain. Another thing I want to say is that there's a lot of confusion today in the marketplace that blockchain is a magic silver bullet that's going to solve all problems. That, for example, in cybersecurity, it will solve all problems. When we look at companies, though, in reality, blockchain is a very interesting yet novel and young technology that promises to be a great tool in the overall tool set. And so as many enterprises will agree, blockchain alone is probably not sufficient to solve all of the cybersecurity needs of a company. However, it could be a very promising tool together with some other technologies. At this point, I just want to take some questions from the audience. Thank you. Yeah, the gentleman in the front. What's your name?
My name is Johnny. I'm from Embassy. So the question is, what kind of companies do you usually invest in?
Thank you. It's a wonderful question. So we typically invest in companies that use blockchain technology to solve problems that could only be used with blockchain technology. So from our second fund, we look for truly blockchain-centric companies. So if blockchain is just one alternative technology that could be used, and you can use others, we typically are not interested. Because if you can do it without blockchain, like with any new and innovative technology, it's probably cheaper easier and safer to do it without blockchain today. So we look for that narrow subset of use cases where you could only achieve that result using blockchain. Typically, we look for companies with strong technical team, and we also look for companies with at least a prototype product. And by the way, I'm very familiar with AmbiSafe's work, and actually, there's a lot of good work in the blockchain space. Pleasure to meet you, Johnny. Sir? Oh, I think there's somebody up front.
Thank you for your speech. My name is Mitra, and the question is like this. You're talking mostly about companies and problems the companies can solve and problems the company has got to solve with blockchain or without it. But what do you think about like open source initiatives? Like, do you treat team behind Ethereum as a company or team behind EOS as a company or not?
Wonderful question. So I'm going to voice my opinion, which is an opinion of one person, right, that happens to invest based on that opinion. Personally, I think that the open source movement is great, and a lot of interesting innovation comes out of the open source movement. I happen to spend most of my career working with and investing in B2B companies, right, in technology companies that cater to the enterprises. In traditional software, it is true that the open source products have their important place, and a lot of large enterprises, they use open source products, although probably the share of open source products versus share of proprietary products, when you look at the enterprise market, proprietary products still win over. In the world of blockchain, I'm not saying that it's good or it's bad, but the reality in 2018 is such that if you talk to Google or Facebook or Microsoft or a large industrial company that buys software solutions from, let's say IBM and Microsoft, they're not even considering seriously using anything that's built on a public blockchain and that's an open source decentralized system. They feel a lot more secure because of issues like security, survivability, ability to influence the build-out process. They go to the likes of IBM, Microsoft, AmbiSafe, companies that also ship private blockchain solutions. So they're very excited about the blockchain part. They're not that excited about cryptocurrencies, and they're very not excited and concerned about using anything that's true open source in the blockchain space. Like, for example, EOS or NEO or Ethereum or anything else. What happens more often is that they'll take a certain public open source product, then they'll employ an engineering team that will fork it internally and create a private chain for them. And security and the protocols in place at the corporate level is the reason why this happens today. Thank you. Great question. Sorry. There's somebody in the second row.
Thank you. Great speech. My name is Ivan Ivaninsky. I'm from Smart Deck Information Security. And the question is, could you please name one or two companies in blockchain area, maybe among your investment, maybe some others, which have a production-ready solution of the problem which did exist before blockchain? So I'm not talking about any exchanges, something like this, of real-world problem. Thank you.
Using blockchain? Or, using blockchain, yes. A great question, and the answer is, in our current portfolio, there's only one company currently in the cybersecurity space, but they're solving a problem that only came with the blockchain world. So we have one company which I cannot disclose for confidentiality purposes, but we co-invested there with a number of Silicon Valley funds and MIT venture fund as well, and they build a new generation of products to ensure security of wallets, and that problem did not happen before we got cryptocurrencies, right? Because you had nothing to store. So we haven't seen, frankly, any company yet that was ready for an investment that was using blockchain to solve a non-blockchain world problem. Thank you. Great question. Thank you very much. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of that conference. And I hope everybody stays safe and secure and nobody gets hacked. Take care.
HackIT. Exploit blockchain.